Good evening, good afternoon, and even good morning to you, depending on where in the world you're joining us from today. I'm Rachel Sandison, Vice Principal for External Relations here at the University of Glasgow, and it is my immense pleasure to warmly welcome you to the University of Glasgow's World Changing Glasgow Conversations. So this is our flagship virtual event series that connects individuals and ideas at a time that has never been more vital, whilst also allowing us to connect in with you, our Team U of G global community. And in the audience today, we have alumni, staff, students, partners, and other friends as well. So please do use the chat function to say hello and to let us know where you're joining us from. So today's conversation focuses on reparative justice and the role of universities, a highly topical theme where the University of Glasgow's sector-leading work led to us being named the 2021 Times Higher Education University of the Year. Our Historical Slavery Initiative follows the publication in 2018 of a report into the way the university benefited from the proceeds of slavery in the 18th and 19th centuries. It includes the establishment of a Glasgow Caribbean Centre for Development Research with the University of the West Indies, our new James McEwan Smith Scholarships, and a far-reaching programme of research collaboration focused on the Global South. This programme of reparative justice has been regarded as an example of good practice by other UK universities, some of which are now developing similar initiatives. And as an institution, we are continuing to make bold, values-based decisions, addressing challenges such as reparative justice, race and climate change. And you'll hear more about some of these initiatives as today progresses. But without further delay, please let me introduce you to our expert panel to discuss what a university should be. Institutions of courage and action, uniquely placed to tackle the biggest issues facing the world. So today, our panel will be led by a man that needs no introduction, our Principal and Vice-Chancellor at the University of Glasgow, Professor Sir Anton Muscatelli, with contributions from Professor Sir Geoff, Chancellor of Heriot-Watt University, Professor Simon Anderson, Director of the George Lane Disease Research Centre and Co-Director of the Glasgow Caribbean Centre for Development Research at the University of West Indies, and Dr. Christine Whyte, Lecturer in Global History here at the University of Glasgow. Now, just a reminder for the audience, although hopefully many of you have joined us previously, please do use the chat function to ask questions or make comments. And many, many thanks to everyone who has taken the time to submit a question in advance. We really do hope to get through as many of those as possible. However, due to the very large number of attendees, which is incredible, we may not be able to pick up all individual questions post the panel, but we will absolutely endeavour to address key themes. And many thanks to our Glasgow colleagues who are helping to moderate the chat today. So we have a lot to get through and nowhere near enough time to do so. So without any further ado, Anton, can I please turn to you to kick off today's session for us?
Well, thank you very much, Rachel, for that introduction, and thank you for hosting this evening's important discussion on reparative justice and the role of universities. These past few weeks at the university, we've been celebrating Black History Month. As always, this has been an opportunity for us to celebrate the contributions of Black and minority ethnic people to our university and to Scotland. But crucially, it's also an important and timely reminder that we must continue to acknowledge and address historic and current racism. And as part of this wider commitment to being an anti-racist institution, we've been continuing to move forward this work that we started in 2016 to examine the historical links with slavery. The University of Glasgow was, I believe, the first institution in the UK to come forward with a programme of reparative justice. And I think it's important to explain the origins of this. We were, of course, established in 1451 as a university, and the history of our institution has been intertwined with that of the city for almost 6 centuries now. And it's a very rich history, and at times it's very complex. And as most people know, as Scotland's tobacco lords amassed great wealth from their dealings with the transatlantic slave trade, Glasgow's economy boomed. And as our city flourished on the profits of the slave trade, so did our university. And although the University of Glasgow never owned enslaved people or traded in the goods they produced, we received significant financial gifts and support from people who derived their wealth from slavery. And this realization of our historic links to slavery may be challenging for some people, and it is compounded by the fact that the university's history in the period of the slave trade is nuanced. We've had to grapple with the fact that two parallel histories of the University of Glasgow exist, one benefiting financially from slavery and the other leading the movement for abolition, because it was in the 18th and 19th century University of Glasgow academics who helped to lead the abolitionist movement in Glasgow and send two anti-slave trade petitions to Parliament. And at that time, the university was located in the city centre, or the very heart of that mercantile business, profiting from the slave trade. And so the issue facing the university was, how do we address this parallel history? And in 2016, some of our academic colleagues in history at Glasgow met with our senior management team, and we recognized that we had to address this hidden, this darker part of our history. We issued, first of all, an acknowledgement that the university received gifts and bequests from persons who benefited from the proceeds of slavery. And thereafter, the university formed the History of Slavery Steering Committee with external consultants and joined the international consortium of universities studying slavery. The steering committee oversaw a year-long research process undertaken by Dr. Stephen Mullen and Professor Simon Newman to produce a report and recommendations. And this report's conclusions found that although difficult to quantify the precise amount, the University of Glasgow did benefit significantly from the profits of racial slavery and recommended a program of reparative justice. Now, this program was designed to be the beginning of a process whereby the university would seek to diversify its community and work to build creative relationships with new partners in regions which had been impacted by slavery, such as the West Indies, and to use our resources as a major international centre for research and learning to increase understanding of slavery and its legacies and enhance racial equality in education and society more widely. We signed a historic memorandum of understanding in 2019 between the University of Glasgow and the University of the West Indies. And this MOU set out our ambitions to work together in the foundation of a Glasgow Caribbean Centre for Development Research that you mentioned. And it was the first step towards undertaking this programme of reparative justice. The centre, which is co-located in Glasgow and the Caribbean, will help to stimulate public awareness about the history of slavery and its impact around the world. And the University of Glasgow has committed to raising and spending £20 million over the next 20 years through the centre. Now, without preempting what my distinguished colleagues will say, I wanted to briefly outline a few key successes from our partnership so far. Firstly, our joint Masters in Reparative Justice will begin in September 2022, and we also now have joint PhDs focused between the Cave Hill Business School in the West Indies and our Adam Smith Business School in Glasgow. The University of Glasgow is also funding 20 scholarships at master's level for African and Caribbean students, as well as staff and student mobility opportunities. Our partnership will also see the development of a Barbados Living Lab funded by the Government of Barbados, twinned with our own initiative here in Glasgow to create a living lab for precision medicine. And if I may at this time, I would like to put on record my sincere thanks to our partner institution, the University of the West Indies, and particularly Professor Simon Anderson for his work. Despite the pandemic slowing us down, we have seen an unwavering commitment to our shared ambitions. And perhaps most importantly, from the initial report and signing of the MOU, we've been able to look at the wider approach as we take a global and anti-racist university take on what we're trying to do. And as part of this, we've created the Beniba Centre for Slavery Studies at Glasgow, an initiative in which my colleague, Dr. Christine Whyte, has played a significant role, and she'll no doubt speak about this. And we've also taken steps to begin decolonising the university's curriculum and our Hunterian museum collections. We've also made a conscious decision to use our history to name our new buildings, such as our James McCune Smith Learning Hub, named after James McCune Smith, born a slave, and who became the first African American to ever receive a medical degree in 1837 from the University of Glasgow. We've also evolved our partnerships in the research and international development space, focusing on meaningful capacity building with in-country partners and creating long-lasting partnerships in nations impacted by Britain's colonial legacy. And ultimately, this process has also helped us to shape how we look to make meaningful decisions for the future. And in fact, it's the words of my friend Sir Geoff Palmer, who of course joins us today, as you said, and who was an external advisor for this report, and I'm reminded of in this respect, because it was Sir Geoff who remarked that while you can't change the past, you can change its consequences. I repeated these words during my speech at the signing of our MOU in 2019 with UWI, but this comment still, I think, resonates with me today. And it's something I've kept in mind this year when faced with the findings of our report called Understanding Racism, Transforming University Cultures, which we published back in February. This report was a response to the UK Equality and Human Rights Commission report on racism in UK universities, and it reflected a number of our students' experiences in Glasgow. And this report was a really difficult read, but allowed us to recognise the detrimental impact these experiences of racism and racial injustice have had on the well-being and the sense of belonging for members of our community. And since then, we've started implementing the report's action plan to become an actively anti-racist institution. There are several ongoing initiatives, but in the first instance, we've been developing race equality training for all our staff to address racial bias proactively and improving how we benchmark our standards and the mechanisms for reporting incidents of racism. So the long and short of all this is that, yes, we've seen progress in addressing our historical links to slavery, but we know ourselves that we've got a long way to go in ensuring racial justice, not only in Glasgow, but beyond our shores. And we've seen from across the globe a grassroots and community-driven desire to see real tangible change in institutions such as ours. And on this final and important note, I'd like to take this opportunity to reiterate this. As a world-changing institution, the University of Glasgow will continue to step up. We will continue to work on our programme of reparative justice. And in doing so, we hope to encourage our peers in the sector in the UK and internationally to do the same where their histories demand it. So with all that being said, thank you, Rachel. I'll now look forward to an interesting and insightful session.
Thank you so much, Anton. And there's an awful lot there that I'm sure we will pick up on as we get to the questions. But just some of the key points that I just wanted to reinforce from what you said is really the fact that the work that we have done is the start of our journey and not the end. And apologies, Sir Geoff, for borrowing your words again, but I think I really love the fact that whilst we cannot change our past, we can look to change its consequences. And I think that has been the approach that the University of Glasgow has taken. And I think we will probably segue in quite naturally from our work around reparative justice to talking about what does it mean for an institution, for an organisation to be actively anti-racist. And of course, there's a lot of work that the University of Glasgow is taking forward in that respect as well. Lots I want to kind of pick up on straight away, but I'm very, very keen to hear from our other panelists before I do. So, Sir Geoff, if I may bring you in at this juncture, I'm really keen to hear your perspective.
Thank you very much. And, it's a great honor to, have been asked to speak to today, and especially to follow the principle of one of our oldest universities. And, when I heard 1491, that's before Columbus went to the New World. And, we're talking about an incident, historical incident that happened in the New World. Now, reparative justice, I'm not an expert in this area. However, reparative justice to me, reparative justice means responses to an injustice. Responses to an injustice. And what is the injustice? Well, many, many years ago, people from Europe decided that, they should enslave Black people, and, say from Africa. And it's even difficult to speak about, that a group of human beings decided to enslave another group of human beings. However, to do this, they realized that they had to have some sort of a justification, because I'm certain that they knew it was wrong. Now, what did they do? In, I think it was 1742, 1753, David Hume, the philosopher, got up one morning and said, you know, Negroes are inferior to whites. Negroes are inferior to whites. And the point is that that terrible statement was picked up by the philosopher Kant, and he tacked it onto race. You know, race doesn't apply to any other living organism on earth. It only applies to human beings. And therefore, it was an invention designed to justify the enslavement of black people. Because if they were inferior and they were an inferior race, then if you're enslaving them, you know, in the Caribbean, then in fact, by saying that they're inferior, well, you are trying to justify it. Now, that view, you know, is with us today. You know, ask yourselves, you know, are you a different race from me? And if you say you are, could you justify that statement or that belief? The point is that that belief is the same belief that killed George Floyd. Policeman in his hands in his pocket, destroying the life of another human being over 9 minutes. And that's why we're speaking today. We're speaking today because the world saw that and decided that that wasn't right. But it's been there for hundreds of years. What we're talking about today is, you know, the slavery. I call it our slavery. But what we're also talking about today are the consequences of that slavery. And one of the consequences is racism. Because by enslaving black people, the concept derived from that was that these inferior people are different races and therefore we can treat them badly. You know, they're subhuman. They weren't really human beings. And therefore, what we have is people taken from Africa with a lifespan of less than 7 years, a young person. I remember reading a statement from Thistlewood's diary. He was a slave owner and he wrote down everything he did. And he described a young black boy. And he said this young black boy, he heard him saying, if this is life, then let me die. If this is life, then let me die. And if you're going to balance that against people in Europe with high intellect, you know, like Boswell, you know, of Boswell and Johnson. And Boswell wrote a poem in 1791 saying, you know, slaves are happy in slavery. They're happier than in slavery than they are in Africa. And slavery became a business which academics justified, and our institution still has a responsibility. One of aspect of reparation is that I hope that one day all our institutions all over the world, you know, all these institutions that teach philosophy or sociology and other aspects of the human condition, I hope they will come out and say that what Hume said was wrong. It has no scientific basis. It was a prejudice. And I think if they did that, then I think we're beginning to change this view, which has become systemic. And it's systemic in a sense that, you know, one may say, I'm not racist, but you know exactly what I'm saying. It's in your conscious or subconscious. It's there. And I give you a little story. I was in Edinburgh a couple of years ago and I went to give a talk. And I was asked, what time? And I said 2:00. And the person at the door said, you couldn't be giving that talk because that talk is being given by Professor Sir Geoff Palmer. Now, that person wasn't a racist in that sense. That person was just expressing hundreds of years of prejudice, which has not been questioned properly. And our institutions can help us to do this by declaring that Hume was wrong. In fact, in the 1960s, when I was in London as a young boy, I heard about Eysenck. And Professor Eysenck, at the time, was putting out concepts. And I was given a test as a young boy in London, and I was declared educationally subnormal on one of these Eurocentric tests. And in 2019, Eysenck's work was declared by King's College London as, in fact, not valid. It was unsafe. That's their term, unsafe. However, he had devised IQ tests to justify scientifically that black people were inferior to white people. So it is not a long time ago, and therefore what we've now got to do today on this platform is to actually admit we've got racism. We've got to admit, Anton has actually stated Glasgow's position about reparation. It is responses to an injustice of black enslavement and the racism that followed. And how can we do it? We've got to do it by healing, by making amends, and Anton has discussed those carried out by the university, which are innovative and are working, and will be discussed later on by Professor Anderson. The point is, I will end with what, as Robert Burns put it, reparation is about goodness. It's the goodness that mitigates woe. I don't think we'll ever, can have a reparative justice that completely solves all the harm and the hurt and the ill feeling from this slavery. However, I would like to conclude, because I think there's an inherent goodness about people. We recognize, most of us, that we're one humanity, nothing less. We're different, but the same. And the goodness we have through reparation will mitigate the woe and establish a relationship which we can use to work together to produce a better future for us all. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sir Geoff, for that really powerful insight. And again, you've mentioned a whole host of things that I'm sure we'll come back to later in today's session. But I just wanted to highlight again this sense that race is an invention. It's a social construct, and it exists purely to justify the enslavement of Black people. And we can connect that to what's happening today, the murder of George Floyd, among many others, sadly, and the Black Lives Matter movement, which I'm sure we will have some questions around. But I think what's also really important is to focus on what universities can do, what actions universities can take today and why that matters. And I'm definitely going to want to come back and ask you a further question on that, if that's okay. But before I do, we have two other panelists who I'm really keen to hear from. So Simon, if I can now turn to you, it would be great to get your perspective, obviously from the University of the West Indies, who are partnering with the University of Glasgow on many of the reparative justice activities that we're taking forward. So Simon, over to you. struggling to hear you, but we're going to just check back in with you in a moment, and hopefully we can sort out the technical issues that we're facing. But whilst we do, actually, Christine, may I turn to you, obviously from within the University of Glasgow community, to talk a little bit about what actions you see the university taking, if that's okay.
Yes, of course. Thank you. And thank you so much for the invitation to join this panel. I've only been working here at the University of Glasgow for about 4 years, though they have, of course, probably been the most eventful and dramatic 4 years. Starting with the launch of the report written by my colleagues, through the signing of the partnership agreement, and then a global health crisis and a renewed Black Lives Matter movement in 2020. And so as a historian, it seems now this year, as we move into this period of recovery and renewal, it is a very appropriate moment to talk about reparative justice. And this global crisis we're all facing inevitably interrupted our progress as immediate needs pressed: children, families, communities, students, co-workers. And for our medical colleagues, such as Professor Simon Anderson, working on the front line, caring for patients. But this global crisis also highlighted the need to address inequalities, and it really showed the central role that research, scholarship, teaching and learning, and international partnerships will play. And so starting with joint teaching efforts like the Masters in Reparative Justice, through collaborative research initiatives and strategic partnerships, there are opportunities to ensure that the rebuilding and restoring that we're planning now also includes and builds in this element of repair and redress. And so there's been kind of 3 things that have come out of my experiences so far of working with everyone on this. The first being this tremendous enthusiasm from all areas of the University of Glasgow to develop these partnerships, to expand the scope from all across the university, but special mention must go to the role of the library, special collections and archives, who have not only deepened our links to sister libraries and archives in the Caribbean, but they also sort of serve as this hub between all the disciplines. And as Anton mentioned, we've established the Beniba Centre for Slavery Studies here as a new research centre focused on supporting collaborative projects and reparative justice. The centre is led by our director, an archaeologist and public historian, Dr. Peggy Brunash. And the centre is named after Beniba, a woman and a mother who was forced to work on the Lucky Hill plantation owned by Cunningham Graham, rector of the University of Glasgow. This was in Jamaica in the mid-18th century. There's such a paucity of records about her life that we don't even know the name of her child, but we try and remember her and her life through the work that we do at the centre. I'd say the second key point is how taking the CARICOM 10-point plan for reparatory justice that was developed in the Caribbean as a roadmap or a guide really highlights the confluence of interconnected priorities which are currently demanding change through the university and also by the university. So many of the issues raised by CARICOM, sustainability, health crisis, development, cultural heritage, are all of deep concern to communities here in Glasgow. And so when we're thinking globally about redressing inequality, we're also working at this local level. The positive is that we have the tools to address these challenges at our disposal. These are not new issues. They're ones that people have been struggling to overcome for some time. But history doesn't provide us with a kind of convenient playbook to confront our current demons. But in the process of seeking to understand, opening up our minds and our hearts to the experiences of the past, equips us with skills to tackle the pressing issues around reparative justice. And the third key thing I think that's come out in the past 4 years has been the significance of unlearning, which is not something we talk about much at university, but unlearning the habits we've had of working and researching and teaching, and looking to new places for inspiration and to being humble in our approach to that. So our principal mentioned the petitions written at the University of Glasgow condemning the slave trade and slavery. And something really telling about those historic petitions is that the first was signed and sent to Westminster only a few months after enslaved people on the French colony of Saint-Domingue began the historic uprising that would later be known as the Haitian Revolution. And the courage of those people inspired the world. And today we can similarly draw our inspiration from leadership shown in the Caribbean, in Africa, from all around the world where people are making these changes. And so this approach will guide the development of the new Masters in Reparative Justice, which will launch in September 2022 to support a new generation of people committed to changing the world. So I'm a very imperfect spokesman for the university as a whole, but I can say truthfully that across the institution, there is a really deep and genuine enthusiasm for our and belief in our abilities to work together towards reparative justice.
Thanks so much, Christine. You did an excellent job of being our spokesperson there. And I think some of what you said is really resonant with me, which is this is about the importance of partnership. It's about ways of engaging our full community, not just here in Glasgow, but actually around the world. And I love this concept of unlearning, and hopefully we'll have time to pick back up on that just through the Q&A that will follow. But I believe that we do have Simon back with us. So Simon, hopefully you have rejoined and we'll be able to hear you.
I hope you can hear me now. So thank you very much for allowing me to join the conversation. My colleagues have spoken, and one of the things that popped into my head as they were speaking was about justice and where it begins. And it only begins where equality and equity reigns. And in a sense, the contextual nature of our situation requires deep understanding from both sides in relation to reparations. I mean, what should universities do, and what does success look like for this venture that Sir Anton has outlined so eloquently? I mean, we need to move on from ad hoc to more strategic partnerships, and to move on from the traditional viewpoints to more co-creative, engaging stance where the collaborations that we have more breadth and depth to it. We need to be able to consider the ethics of collaboration as we, as smaller developing states in the Caribbean, for example, work closely with our colleagues on the other side of the Atlantic. Glasgow is a thriving university, and therefore there's opportunity for some sustainable, beneficial activities that will make the partnership strong in the long term. And we ought to leverage this collaboration that we're developing to enhance the value through expansion into communities, for example. Now, the development of the Glasgow Caribbean Centre for Development Research is not one to take on the activities of the colleagues who are academics and scholars of reparations studies. I mean, the CARICOM Reparations Commission is mandated to undertake that on behalf of the Caribbean. And also within the University of the West Indies, there is a Centre for Reparations Research, which is headed by Professor Vereen Shepherd, which is working to promote economic integration and cooperation. But through its history, we understand the Caribbean, a melting pot, a vulnerable place. I was reading an IMF report the other day which suggested that since 1950, there are about 500 natural disasters worldwide, and 2/3 of those are occurring in the Caribbean. So we understand restoring. We understand what it is that we need to build back, because we are subject to hurricanes, storms, earthquakes, and the light on a daily, probably yearly basis. But we have to probably point back to 1943 when the commission chaired by Asquith, the Asquith Commission, was starting to consider principles that would guide the promotion of higher education and learning in what they call the colonies, in the development of universities and colonies. And we, as a university, was established not as long as 1491, but in 1948. And so that should give you some sort of context in which we are having this relationship. It is imbalanced in terms of power, research ability, but it is balanced in terms of goodwill. And the University of the West Indies in Glasgow signed their MOU acknowledging that the benefit that flowed to the University of Glasgow as a consequence of the historic transatlantic trade in enslaved peoples would really revert back through our collaborative activities. And the Vice Chancellor of Glasgow speaks to spending over £20 million over the years of this activity. Now, the purpose really is to ensure that as Glasgow recognizes its own history as an institution and benefiting from slavery, we as the Caribbean people wish to develop the opportunities of academic collaboration as part of reparative justice. And so we have a very strong sort of governance structure for this program with a board that comprises senior staff across the institutions. On the UA side, this includes persons like Professor Viren Shepherd and the principal of the Caville campus, Professor Clive Landis, and also Pro-Vice Chancellors for graduate and undergraduate research. And so there's a broad area of activity that is planned. And we think about it as the 3 pillars, but the 3 pillars can expand and grow as we expand our horizons and opportunities come forth. One of the first things is the need to consider the impact of and the history of slavery, and through a digital / virtual museum is something that we can use to sort of take this forward. A second theme, or second pillar, is looking at the emerging problems in the Caribbean, and they really come from long years of slavery and that long years of post-colonial underdevelopment, and leading to a lot of chronic and emerging diseases that are robbing the region of its youth, and of course those who are sort of generating income for the communities. And then of course we have changing societies that are impacted by climate change, and the need for gender and education equity. So in terms of the broad range of activities, we've got PhD programs that are going to be joint between the universities. We've had long discussions in relation to how that might work. The MA in Reparative Justice is really one of the sort of key things that are going to come out of the program, and this particularly allows us to consider some of the issues related to the past and how justice might be served. But there are also other activities in relation to collaborative ventures for a biobank across the Caribbean. There are collaborative ventures related to an initiative for human heritage and the environment with colleagues that are across the region. And of course, in terms of funding the pump priming opportunities that allow us to enable colleagues to apply for funds who want to take short-term visits to Glasgow. In particular, the 20 scholarships that are going to be able to enable capacity building within the region as a developmental theme. And of course, in terms of infrastructure, which is always something. But I wanted to make a personal comment about the slavery report, which I read and was quite sobering. And I myself came to the conclusion that an action plan that is considered the need to have ethnic diversity as a strategy going forward within the university there might be sort of watershed moments for other universities to look at and to sort of allow a different perspective of students and staff in terms of how interactions take place, and to allow students and staff to achieve their fuller potential in a nurtured environment. And when I read the report, the conclusions speak to some sort of a reconceptive environment where staff and students could flourish. And so this is part of the process of looking inwards and acting outwards. And we're looking inwards in terms of considering across the faces of universities in the UK, considering our collaborations and how the ethics of those collaborations operate in a just manner with good governance and with fairness. So I think that those are my few points to make in this conversation. And of course, I'm very happy to take them further. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Simon. I'm so happy that we managed to have you rejoin. And I love this idea of kind of looking inwards but acting outwards. I think that's really vital. And it's also just inspiring to hear about the sheer breadth and depth of the collaborative activities between the University of the West Indies and the University of Glasgow at such an early stage, actually, in our partnership development as well. So lots of exciting things to come, I've got no doubt. Thank you all so much for those introductory insights. I know that our kind of audience from their homes have been very much enjoying the conversation that's already taken place, but I do have some questions that I want to pose to you all. And the first one, Sir Geoff, I may come to you if that's okay. But the first one that really has come to the fore, we had lots of people submitting questions around this. And I guess it follows the varied media activity over the last few years regarding how universities and other organisations both acknowledge their pasts without erasing their history. So, you know, can historic organisations of national importance honour their traditions whilst also acknowledging colonialism in a meaningful and not tokenistic way? Sorry, that's a very big question to put to you first and foremost, but I'm going to start with you, Sir Geoff, if that's okay.
Yeah, I think it's a very important question, because if you had concepts coming from academics or from academia like Hume and Kant, then the only people who can actually redress those in terms of the public at large worldwide are the academic institutions. And until they do this, we could do whatever we like. But what I think the question is about, how are the institutions going to redress those kinds of academically based prejudices, which the world believes? And until they do that, the world will continue to believe it. So, you know, it's a tough ask, but I think that is important.
No, thank you so much for that, Sir Geoff. And actually, Anton, if I can maybe turn to you, because another question that we've been sent in is really about how do we address our critics? How do we ensure that we bring our community on this journey with us? And I think the steps that the University of Glasgow have taken have been big and bold and very visible to our stakeholders, and overall have been met with overwhelming positivity from our community. But there have been critics. You know, not everyone has understood why we were taking the steps that we were taking. And how have we responded to those challenges around the university's position?
No, thanks, Rachel. That's a really important question, because others will be facing this. And we knew this would be an initiative that attracted some hostility and criticism. But of course, that wasn't the most important factor in driving our decision, because this was very much an initiative led by our community, our staff and student community, and that was the driving force. We did have those who said, for instance, that slavery was, in the past, that it was a sin of our ancestors. Glasgow cannot enact restorative justice because those enslaved people harmed as a result of the slave trade passed away many years ago. However, and Geoff touched on this, the reality is that Black students in Scotland and communities across the world are still being impacted by the historical legacy. So we do have a civic duty and a responsibility to address this. And another point that Geoff made, which is important, is that the validation of the slave trade came from academia. So the reality is that unless we are front and center in denying those mistakes of the past, that our own academic base was pushing forward, these issues around race that Geoff was talking about, and validating essentially the slave trade, that we need to be at the forefront of repudiating that. So my answer has always been, well, we want to be a world-changing university. That's in one of the things and straplines we use to describe ourselves. Well, we changed the world not for the better during those times. We actually validated some pretty awful things. So if we want to be a world-changing university in the 21st century, then we actually have to redress those mistakes of the past. So and to me, despite, as you say, some of those pressures from some people who felt it's all of the past, just forget it. It's not. It's, we were part of it.
No, thank you so much, Anton. And I wonder, Simon, can I maybe just bring you in at this juncture as well? Because I guess, part of the partnership with the University of Glasgow and the University of the West Indies is for you to continually challenge us to go harder, go faster, to commit more. How would you frame this from your perspective?
Yeah, I think that there's a chain of events historically that leads to current activities and actions, and we can't divorce ourselves from our past. It's an impossibility, and it is that causes a lot of disruption and subnormality in society, and it's definitely a thing within universities, because it is where most thought leaders live and operate from, and the ability to change minds with the sort of actions that are brought forward from these thoughts that are portrayed. And one of the things that I think universities are meant to do is to make sure that they redress any distortion that occurs. And one of the major distortions is some of the leading thinkers of the past who felt that the status quo in their time was perfect. But now we have a different viewpoint. We realize that the status quo in the past was illogical and hurtful, and therefore Glasgow sets itself up as the first in the UK universities that, from our point of view as Caribbean people, to say, listen, we were part of this destructive modus operandi in the Caribbean through the legacies that we've gained. But let us try and turn the clock back. Let's try and make a change within communities by working together with the university, which was developed for moving the Caribbean forward, in a sense, to provide capacity, to provide trade, and to make sure that we have key roles filled in our society. And working with Glasgow, which is way ahead in some of these things, is perfectly fine. And there are ways that we are way ahead of Glasgow in things. And so it's a mutual activity. It's not we're waiting for with a hat and a penny to drop in there. What we're trying to say is that let's go on this journey together and sustain it. And I think that what will happen in the future is that they will look at this record of this activity, because I'm 100% certain that all the universities across the UK will consider this activity as groundbreaking, as defining, as moment defining, in terms of how one sphere of society can influence the whole environment in terms of how they acted. So that's my few points of that.
Absolutely, Simon. And I think you mentioned this already in your kind of opening provocation, that this is about partnership that is mutually beneficial that is based on mutual respect and peer esteem. And actually, we have a huge amount to learn from the University of the West Indies, in the same way that the University of the West Indies has things to learn from the University of Glasgow and the approach that we've taken. And this is what really strengthens the partnership and will hopefully allow us to deliver world-changing initiatives and activities on behalf of our communities. And to that point, Christine, I might just bring you in now, if that's okay, because we haven't really spoken too much at this stage about the positive influence that this can have on our current and future students. And I'm particularly interested in thinking about our curriculum content. We mentioned briefly the initiative to decolonise the curriculum, to unlearn certain behaviours, and to think more broadly about the way in which this may impact on the way in which we deliver teaching, learning, and the wider student experience at Glasgow. So do you want to come in and just say a few words about that?
Yes, thanks, Rachel. And I mean, the report had this really immediate effect on the content of the curriculum, in that the report is now something that we teach here. It's something that we explore with the students, both the methods that were used, but also the kind of public history impact that it had, so the kind of public reactions that we've been talking about. Across the university, I think there's a real drive to reshape the content of the curriculum in a way that reflects the world in which we're living, the context in which we're living. But it's sort of also about something more than that. So you mentioned this unlearning, which I also mentioned, this thinking about the structures of the ways that we're doing things. And because here at Glasgow, when we teach, we're always teaching what we're researching. We're always sort of teaching what we've just newly discovered, whether that's in a lab or in an archive. And so by having these kinds of equitable research collaborations, it has this like really direct effect, I think, on both what we're teaching, but how we're teaching it, and sort of rethinking those approaches. And I'm also really hopeful that students will be becoming involved in these kinds of initiatives. So, you know, speaking from my own area, things like creating a virtual museum is something that students at the University of the West Indies and the University of Glasgow can collaborate together. So they get this kind of the skills of developing these kind of public history programs, as well as sort of learning this new historical research that's coming out.
Yeah, great. And actually, I just wanted to point to a question that we've had in the chat from Rachel Johnston on exactly this topic around decolonising the curriculum. And she's asking, is it really just about teaching old favourites with caveats, or is it truly about replacing our current curriculum with a more diverse curriculum? And so, Christine, do you want to come in and comment on that, or maybe Anton, you want to jump in as well?
Well, I suppose this it sometimes sounds quite radical, this idea of replacing the curriculum. But I mean, everyone who teaches in a university knows that we teach something new every single year, because we teach the new findings and we teach the new research that's coming out. And so I don't think it is just about teaching the old favourites with new caveats or warnings, but I think it's about doing what we've always been trying to do, which is really give our students the best experience possible.
And if I can,
Anton, so do you want to add to that?
Yeah, thanks very much, Rachel. I would agree with that, and it's actually about improving our curriculum. We're constantly looking for new perspectives. We're looking for new views. I mean, we like to see ourselves as a global university. Now, you can't have a global university that basically just teaches things from its own backyard. And so for me, although decolonizing the curriculum has a particular connotation because of the context in which the recommendation was couched, actually I see it as much more positively. This is about our students being exposed to different cultures, to different global perspectives. It's a hugely positive thing. It's a way in which we gain from what is happening across the world.
Yeah, no, thanks so much, Anton. And Geoff and Simon, I may come back to you both, because there's another very big question that we had sent in. And it is, how does one target and delimit who is deserving of reparative justice? You know, which events and which people, and you mentioned a little bit about this again in your introduction, Sir Geoff, so I might come to you first. Do you have any thoughts on this?
Well, I think, you know, I used to say to my students, you must not compare evils. They must be considered separately and dealt with accordingly. Because one of the things that I've noticed with slavery in the Caribbean, and I say it should be called chattel slavery because that's what it was. And I don't want to compare it with modern slavery or, you know, white slavery or African slavery or whatever. I think as people who are thinking, we should say we're talking about chattel slavery. We can define it. You know, a slave had no right to life and was property for which compensation was paid. It was legal. And therefore, other slaveries have their own horrors. But this was illegal. And I think people find it difficult to accept that because they're thinking, well, how could that have been legal? It was. And therefore, this slavery carries a responsibility. I've called it the most profitable evil, legal evil the world has known. And therefore, we're trying to redress something that has been ignored. And as Anton says, I think it's very powerful for tonight that a 1451 institution is saying that institutions who kickstarted this academically, this about, you know, black people are inferior to white people, should take the responsibility and inform the public, not in peer review papers, but to the press, which the people read. They don't read peer review papers. And therefore, that's the challenge. And I feel that's why we are talking tonight. We are talking about something that happened, not for 5 years or 10 years, but for hundreds of years. Can you imagine it? Hundreds of years. And thus, that's why we need to address this, because racism has come from this, where people are excluded from jobs, from positions, and are being, you know, murdered. And thus, as a modern society, we cannot pass that on to the next generation and to the next generation. We cannot. And therefore, that's what we're trying to do. And Glasgow University that have taken these steps should be, you know, thanked. And I hope it is like a first light in terms of looking at an injustice and trying to repair it.
Yeah.
Which is a wonderful way for us to kind of end today's session, but I'm really keen to bring Simon in. So Simon, you may have the final word on this. Do you have anything that you want to add?
Well, I just wanted to say that, you know, we always consider the big things that we see around us, but never really truly understand that big things come from really small ideas, you know. And, you know, a lot of time there will be people who are saying that there needs to be more done. There needs to be more done. There needs to be more done. But I think that we have to be very sort of strategic in the way how we take this forward. We have to be very strategic, and we have to basically start from small and grow. In the Caribbean, they say one cocoa full basket. It basically is saying little by little, you'll get a full basket, but you just need to take this each step. And you know, the Rome wasn't built in a day, and the Caribbean will always be there with its nice beaches, etc. But development will take place, and will take place with or without partners. But what we're appreciative of is when our partners come to say, let's work together. And this is what the Glasgow Caribbean Centre will try to fulfill on behalf of its constituents in Glasgow, because Glasgow's money is being spent, and in the Caribbean, because there's a lot to learn from us as well. Those are my few words. Thank you.
So I know that we have run out of time, but I am hearing that we have a very engaged audience, which is fabulous. So Anton, if I may just turn to you for the final word, and you may want to just reflect on some of what you've heard tonight from our panelists, or reflect again on just some of the steps the University of Glasgow is taking forward, not just in terms of reparative justice, but actually that broader anti-racism stance, because that is something that is very, very important to the University of Glasgow at this present time. What more can we be doing? What will we be doing going forward?
Well, I think there's so much that could be doing. I could be here another 5-10 minutes, but let me try and be brief, Rachel. I think, look, I think as I said in my remarks, we know that racism is still embedded in UK university culture. I mean, it's been reflected in the Equalities and Human Rights Commission report, and it's reflected in society, let alone universities, which are a key part of society. I mean, if you look at the EHRC report, the kind of things they pointed to were, how do we deal with racism on campuses with, underreporting and victims having lost faith in the complaints process? How do we deal with a fragmented, inconsistent complaint system? So these are areas, for instance, where we are acting, we're trying to make it better. Difficult though it is, because obviously it's difficult to support people who don't have faith in a system that hasn't been as proactive around fighting racism. But we are wanting to unpick these various compounding factors. We're looking at ways in which we can have better representation on our staff of people from Black and ethnic minority communities. We've set ourselves targets to do that. We've looked at ways in which our processes, whether it's promotion processes or other processes, might have bias involved in them. So there's a whole range of areas where we are trying to act in a way that's consonant with our desire to become an anti-racist institution.
Thank you so much for that, Anton. That was an incredibly quick 60 minutes. I'm afraid that literally is all that we have time for, but can I just take this opportunity to once again thank our incredible speakers, to Anton, Sir Geoff, Simon and Christine for your time today. For those of you watching, if you would like to know more about the University of Glasgow's work in this area, and in particular our partnership with the University of the West Indies, please do use the links located at the top of the chat or within the event description, which will take you to further information. Thank you to you, our global audience, for joining us today. A link to this recording will be circulated along with a link for some feedback. Please do take 5 minutes to help us out with that if you can. It really does only take a moment, but it does help to influence and shape what we do next. As you know already, you have just joined us for the first talk in our second series of World Changing Glasgow Conversations. Many thanks for listening and engaging. It's a goodbye for now, but we look forward to connecting with you again soon. And in the meantime, please stay safe and take care. Thank you.
That was very well presented.